Katherine Blackwood's Louboutin heels clicked sharply against the polished floors of Richmond Heights Academy, each step echoing her mounting frustration. The exclusive private school's hallways, usually silent during class hours, amplified the sound of her approach. As the newly appointed head of the school board and heiress to the Blackwood publishing empire, she was here to address what she considered an outrageous situation. A teacher who dared to challenge her vision for the academy's future. "Mr. James Carter?" she called out, pushing open the door to classroom 204 without waiting for a response. The sight that greeted her stopped her cold. The classroom she'd expected to find empty during lunch break was alive with activity. A dozen students huddled around a young man seated at one of the student desks, not the teacher's desk, as he explained something with animated gestures. The walls were covered with colorful diagrams and student projects, a far cry from the austere atmosphere she'd mandated for the academy's new image. The man looked up, and Katherine felt an unexpected jolt. James Carter wasn't the stern, older teacher she'd imagined from his strongly worded emails opposing her proposed curriculum changes. He was young, probably in his early 30s, with intelligent eyes and an earnest expression that somehow made his worn blazer and second-hand clothes look dignified rather than shabby. "Ms. Blackwood," he said, standing up, "I wasn't expecting you until our scheduled meeting tomorrow." His voice carried no trace of intimidation, only a calm certainty that made her rehearsed speech of authority feel suddenly inadequate. "These meetings aren't authorized," she said, gesturing to the students. "Lunch break is meant for lunch, Mr. Carter, not unauthorized tutoring sessions." One of the students, a girl with thick glasses and a worn backpack, spoke up. "But Ms. Blackwood, Mr. Carter is helping us prepare for the state science competition. We asked him to help us during lunch because some of us have to work after school and can't stay late." Katherine noticed how James Carter didn't jump to defend himself, instead letting his students speak. His quiet confidence was unnerving, so different from the usual, desperate-to-please attitude she encountered from employees. "The science competition isn't part of our curriculum anymore," Katherine replied firmly. "The board decided to focus on college preparatory courses that have more practical value for our students' futures. With all due respect, Ms. Blackwood," James finally spoke, his voice level but intense, "these students are discovering their passion for science. Maria here," he gestured to the girl with glasses, "has already designed an innovative water filtration system that could help communities in crisis. How is that not practical value?" Katherine felt her carefully constructed arguments beginning to crumble. She looked around the room, really seeing it for the first time. The projects on the walls weren't just displays, they were real experiments and innovations. One showed a solar-powered charging station, another detailed a biodegradable plastic alternative. "Mr. Carter stays with us during his lunch break because he believes in us," another student added. "He even uses his own money to buy supplies for our projects." This revelation hit Katherine like a physical blow. She'd reviewed the school's budget cuts personally, including the elimination of funding for extracurricular science programs. She'd considered it a necessary sacrifice to fund the new state-of-the-art computer lab and business center, facilities that would photograph well for the school's marketing materials. "May I have a word with you in private, Mr. Carter?" she managed, struggling to maintain her composure. He nodded, turning to his students. "Keep working on those quantum mechanics problems. Remember, it's not about memorizing formulas, it's about understanding the principles behind them." In the hallway, Katherine crossed her arms, trying to regain her sense of authority. "You've been sending emails, criticizing the board's new direction for the academy. You've called our focus on prestigious college admissions short-sighted and detrimental to true education." "I stand by those words," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Education isn't about manufacturing perfect college applications or impressive statistics. It's about nurturing curiosity, critical thinking, and passion for learning. These kids don't need another lesson in how to look good on paper. They need someone to show them their potential is limitless." That's idealistic and unsustainable, Katherine argued, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. The reality is that parents pay premium tuition for results, not science experiments during lunch breaks. Is that why you're really here, Ms. Blackwood? Results? Or is it because someone finally dared to question whether your vision of success might be missing something essential? His words struck uncomfortably close to home. Katherine thought of her own education at exclusive private schools, the relentless pressure to maintain the Blackwood family's reputation for excellence. She'd graduated with honors, taken over her father's position on the school board, and felt absolutely nothing when she'd achieved each carefully planned milestone. "You're crossing a line, Mr. Carter," she warned, but there was a tremor in her voice that betrayed her uncertainty. "Maybe that line needs to be crossed," he replied softly. "You've read my emails, Ms. Blackwood, but have you really looked at what's happening in these classrooms? Have you seen the light in a student's eyes when they finally grasp a difficult concept? Have you felt the energy when they're excited about learning, not just achieving?" Before Katherine could respond, the door to classroom 204 opened and Maria stepped out. "Mr. Carter, we think we solved the quantum tunneling problem, but we wanted to check our approach." James Carter's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Excuse me, Ms. Blackwood, duty calls." He turned to follow his student, then paused. "You're welcome to join us. See for yourself what real education looks like." Katherine stood frozen in the hallway, her carefully ordered world tilting on its axis. Through the classroom door, she could hear excited voices explaining their solution. James Carter's encouraging questions, guiding them to deeper understanding. It was everything her own education had lacked, everything she'd been determined to replace with practical, measurable outcomes. For the first time in her life, Katherine Blackwood, heiress and power broker, felt completely out of her depth. And somewhere deep inside, past the walls of privilege and predetermined success, something long dormant began to stir. Curiosity. As she walked away, her heels clicking more softly now, Katherine couldn't shake the image of James Carter's passionate defense of his students, or the unsettling question of whether she'd been wrong about everything she thought she knew about education, success, and what really matters in life. That evening, Katherine sat in her penthouse office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the city lights below. She'd barely touched the expensive takeout cooling on her desk, her mind still replaying the scene from Richmond Heights Academy. The quarterly board meeting was tomorrow, and her presentation on the school's new direction suddenly felt hollow. Her laptop screen displayed James Carter's personnel file. His credentials were impressive. Graduated summa cum laude from MIT, turned down lucrative positions at tech companies to teach. His salary was almost embarrassingly modest, yet his students consistently achieved the highest test scores in the state. More importantly, they went on to win numerous science competitions and innovation awards. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. She'd built her reputation on making tough, practical decisions. Yet here she was, obsessing over one teacher's idealistic stance on education. Her phone buzzed. Another message from her father. "Katherine, don't forget tomorrow's board meeting is crucial. The Whitman family is considering a major donation for the new business center. Don't let that troublesome teacher derail our plans." The word troublesome made her frown. Just yesterday, she would have agreed with that assessment. Now she found herself defending James Carter in her mind. He wasn't troublesome. He was passionate, dedicated, real, unable to shake her unease. Katherine did something unprecedented. She returned to the school after hours. The security guard recognized her immediately, of course, but seemed surprised by her presence at 7:30 p.m. "Mr. Carter still here?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Always is, Miss Blackwood. Room 204, same as usual." The hallways felt different in the evening light, less imposing somehow. As she approached room 204, she heard voices, not the eager chatter of the lunch session, but something quieter, more intense. "You can do this, Tommy," James's voice carried through the partially open door. "I know the material seems overwhelming, but let's break it down step by step." Katherine peered in. James sat with a student she recognized as Thomas Chen, one of the scholarship students her father had been reluctant to admit. The boy's face was twisted in frustration as he stared at a physics textbook. "I'm just not smart enough," Tommy said, his voice thick with defeat. "My parents work 2 jobs each to cover what the scholarship doesn't. I can't let them down, but maybe everyone's right. Maybe kids like me don't belong at Richmond Heights." Katherine felt her chest tighten. She'd overheard similar sentiments in board meetings, wealthy parents questioning the wisdom of diluting the school's prestigious population with scholarship students. "Look at me, Tommy," James said firmly. "You belong here every bit as much as anyone else. More maybe, because you understand the value of this opportunity. You're not struggling because you're not smart enough. You're struggling because you're trying to memorize instead of understand." He stood up and walked to the whiteboard, grabbing a marker. "Forget the textbook for a minute. Let me show you how I think about these problems." Katherine watched, transfixed, as James began drawing diagrams and writing equations. But unlike the dry presentations she was used to, he wove a story around the physics concepts. Force vectors became characters in an intricate dance. Mathematical relationships transformed into logical puzzles that built upon each other. Gradually, Tommy's expression changed from confusion to interest to excitement. "Wait," he said suddenly. "So if I think about it like that, then—" He grabbed his pencil and started solving a problem he'd been stuck on minutes before. "Exactly." James's face lit up with genuine joy at his student's breakthrough. "See? You didn't need to memorize anything. You just needed to understand the story the numbers are telling." Katherine found herself stepping into the classroom, drawn by the palpable energy of the moment. Both James and Tommy looked up, startled by her presence. "Ms. Blackwood," Tommy started to stand, but she waved him back down. "Please, continue," she said softly. I wanted to observe." James gave her a long look, then turned back to Tommy. "Show Ms. Blackwood how you'd solve the next problem using what you just learned." For the next half hour, Katherine witnessed what real teaching looked like. It wasn't about memorization or test scores or college applications. It was about lighting a spark of understanding, about showing students their own capabilities. When Tommy finally packed up his books, his entire demeanor had changed. "Thanks, Mr. Carter," he said, then added shyly, "My mom's making dumplings tonight. She always makes extra. Save them for your lunch tomorrow." James replied with a warm smile. "You'll need brain food for the physics quiz." After Tommy left, Katherine remained, watching as James erased the whiteboard and organized the classroom for the next day. "You spend every evening like this?" she asked. "Not every evening," he replied, not looking up from his task. "Some students need extra help in the mornings instead. You're not paid for this." "Not everything valuable comes with a price tag, Ms. Blackwood." The subtle dig made her wince. "What happens to students like Tommy under the new curriculum?" "When we cut the scholarship program to fund the business center," James finally turned to face her, his expression serious. "You tell me. You're the one with the power to make these decisions. The Whitman donation could transform this school," she argued, but her voice lacked conviction. "Into what?" James challenged. "Another factory for producing privileged burnout students who know how to pass tests but have lost their love of learning. How many Tommies are we willing to sacrifice for that?" Katherine felt her carefully constructed worldview cracking. "I used to love learning," she admitted suddenly, surprising herself. "Before it became about maintaining the family legacy, about proving I deserved my position." She trailed off, realizing she'd revealed more than she intended. James's expression softened slightly. "It's never too late to rediscover that love, Ms. Blackwood." "Katherine," she corrected automatically, then felt her cheeks warm at his slight smile. "Katherine," he acknowledged, "would you like to see what these students are really capable of? Not the statistics or the test scores, but their actual projects." She found herself nodding, and James began showing her around the classroom. explaining each display with the same passion he'd shown while teaching Tommy. There was Maria's water filtration system, designed after she learned about her grandmother's village lacking clean water. Another student had developed a simple but effective way to help his autistic brother communicate emotions. These aren't just science projects, Katherine realized aloud. These are solutions to real problems. They're making a difference. That's what education should be about, James said quietly. Not just preparing students for success, but showing them how to use that success to contribute something meaningful to the world. Their eyes met, and Katherine felt something shift inside her. This man, with his worn blazer and unwavering principles, was making her question everything she'd built her life around. As she drove home that night, her thoughts weren't on the board meeting or the Whitman donation. Instead, she found herself wondering what kind of person she might have become if she'd had a teacher like James Carter, someone who cared more about nurturing potential than polishing credentials. The next morning's board meeting loomed ahead, and for the first time in her life, Katherine Blackwood wasn't sure where her loyalty should lie, with the prestigious legacy she'd been born to protect, or with the simple, powerful truth she'd witnessed in room 204. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and crisp, but Katherine hardly noticed the weather as she stood in front of her floor-length mirror, adjusting her Chanel suit for the third time. Her reflection showed the perfect image of confidence and authority. But inside, she felt like a house of cards ready to collapse. Her phone buzzed with a message from James. "The students wanted you to see this before the meeting." Attached was a video montage of his students explaining their projects, not just the technical aspects, but the personal stories behind them. Tommy Chen spoke about how understanding physics had given him the confidence to believe in himself. Maria tearfully described her grandmother's joy at learning about the water filtration project. Katherine's hands trembled as she set down the phone. In less than an hour, she would stand before the board and present her vision for Richmond Heights Academy's future. The PowerPoint presentation waited on her laptop, full of impressive statistics and projections about how the new business center would enhance the school's prestige. But now those carefully crafted slides felt like a betrayal. The boardroom was already full when she arrived. Her father, Richard Blackwood, sat at the head of the table, his steel-grey hair and impeccable suit projecting the same authority she'd tried to emulate her entire life. Next to him sat Gerald Whitman, the potential donor, looking expectantly at her. "Katherine," her father nodded, "I trust you're prepared to show the board how we're going to take Richmond Heights Academy into the future." She connected her laptop to the projector, acutely aware of every eye in the room. As her title slide appeared on the screen, she caught movement at the boardroom's glass wall. James Carter stood in the hallway, surrounded by his students. They weren't supposed to be there, but somehow she wasn't surprised they'd come. "Before I begin," Katherine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I'd like to share something with the board." She minimized her presentation and pulled up James's video instead. "Katherine," her father warned, but she pressed play before he could object. For the next 10 minutes, the boardroom was silent except for the voices of students sharing their stories. Katherine watched the faces around the table, saw the surprise, the reluctant interest, and in some cases, the genuine emotion their testimonies evoked. When the video ended, Katherine took a deep breath. "The presentation I prepared talks about numbers, prestige, and financial projections, but it doesn't talk about what Richmond Heights Academy really is, or what it could be." She walked to the window, gesturing to the students outside. "These aren't just statistics to improve our college acceptance rate. They're young people with dreams, ideas, and the potential to change the world. And they're being guided by teachers who understand that education is about more than test scores." Gerald Whitman leaned forward. "Ms. Blackwood, while these stories are touching, the business center would provide practical skills that—" "With all due respect, Mr. Whitman," Katherine interrupted, "I've seen what practical skills look like. I've seen students applying physics to solve real-world problems, using chemistry to develop environmental solutions, and learning mathematics through real applications. They're not just memorizing formulas, they're understanding how to think. Her father's face had turned stormy. Katherine, you're jeopardizing a significant donation. The business center is essential for what, Dad? For our prestige, our rankings? Katherine felt years of suppressed feelings bubbling to the surface. I was educated that way. Everything was about appearances, about maintaining the Blackwood legacy. And yes, I succeeded. But at what cost? I lost my love of learning. I forgot what it meant to be curious, to be passionate about something real. She turned back to the board members. The students outside this room aren't just learning subjects, they're discovering who they are and what they can contribute to the world. And it's happening because of teachers like James Carter, who see education as a calling, not a business transaction. This is absurd, her father stood up. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. That teacher has clearly... That teacher, Katherine cut in, her voice sharp, has shown me what real education looks like. And if we move forward with cutting the scholarship program and eliminating science funding for his business center, we're not just losing valuable programs, we're betraying our responsibility as educators. The room erupted in heated discussion. Board members argued back and forth, some defending the traditional approach, others intrigued by Katherine's impassioned speech. Through the glass, she could see James watching, his expression unreadable. Gerald Whitman cleared his throat. Ms. Blackwood, you speak of real-world applications. Show me some numbers. What have these science programs actually achieved? Katherine seized the opportunity. She pulled up statistics she'd gathered the night before. Patents filed by former students, scientific competition victories, college scholarships earned. These aren't just impressive numbers, Mr. Whitman. These represent lives changed, innovations created and potential realized. Imagine what we could achieve if we invested in expanding these programs instead of replacing them. To her surprise, Whitman looked interested. You're suggesting we redirect the donation? I'm suggesting we invest in what's already working, Katherine replied. These students don't need another business center. They need more resources for the programs that are already changing their lives. Your donation could help us expand the scholarship program, upgrade the science labs, and support more innovative projects. Her father interrupted. Gerald, surely you can't be considering... Actually, Richard, Whitman said thoughtfully, your daughter makes some compelling points. My own success started in a high school science lab, not a business center. Perhaps it's time to return to fundamentals. The meeting devolved into intense discussion about budgets, allocations, and program requirements. Through it all, Katherine stood her ground, fighting for every dollar for the science program, for the scholarship fund, for the future she now believed in. Hours later, she emerged from the boardroom exhausted but triumphant. The science program would not only be saved but expanded. The scholarship program would continue with additional funding for students like Tommy Chen. It wasn't a complete victory. Compromises had been made, but it was a start. James waited in the hallway, his students having long since returned to class. That couldn't have been easy, he said quietly. Katherine felt tears threatening to spill. Nothing worth doing ever is, right? Isn't that what you tell your students? He smiled, and she felt her heart skip. Thank you, he said simply, not just for the program, but for understanding what really matters. She wanted to say more, about how he'd opened her eyes, about the feelings she was developing, about the way her world had shifted on its axis. Instead, she just nodded, suddenly aware of her father's angry stride coming down the hallway. Katherine! Richard Blackwood's voice boomed. We need to talk about what just happened. You've embarrassed this family, thrown away years of planning. No, Dad. She turned to face him, drawing strength from James's presence behind her. For the first time in my life, I've done something I'm truly proud of. Something that matters. Her father's face reddened. "You've forgotten who you are. The Blackwood name will now be associated with educational innovation and genuine student success," she interrupted. "Isn't that better than just being known for our money?" As her father sputtered in rage, Katherine felt a strange sense of peace. She'd chosen her path, regardless of the consequences, but when she turned to share the moment with James, he was gone, leaving her to wonder if she'd gained something profound, only to lose something potentially even more valuable. The fallout from the board meeting was swift and severe. Within days, Katherine found herself effectively frozen out of the family business. Her father had removed her from all key committees at Blackwood Publishing, and her mother's usually chatty texts had dwindled to terse, formal messages about missed family dinners. But it was the silence from James Carter that bothered her most. A week after the meeting, Katherine sat in her office at home, staring at a formal letter of resignation from the school board. Her father's executive assistant had delivered it earlier, with clear instructions about the appropriate way to exit gracefully. The implied threat was clear: resign willingly or be forced out. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. The local education blog had picked up the story. "Blackwood heiress goes rogue. Richmond Heights Academy drama unfolds." The article painted her as either a rebellious socialite having a breakdown or a brave reformer, depending on which anonymous source was quoted. "Enough," she muttered, grabbing her keys. She needed to see James, to understand why he'd disappeared after she'd fought so hard for his program. The drive to Richmond Heights Academy took longer than usual, each traffic light giving her another chance to turn back. The school was quiet in the late afternoon. Most students gone, except for those in after-school activities. She found James in his classroom, but he wasn't alone. A woman sat perched on the edge of his desk, laughing at something he'd said. She was pretty in an understated way, wearing casual clothes that somehow looked effortlessly elegant. "Katherine!" James straightened up, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," Katherine replied, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I can come back another time." "No, please." The woman stood up, smiling warmly. "You must be Katherine Blackwood. I'm Sarah Chen, Tommy's mother. I was just thanking Mr. Carter for everything he's done for my son." Katherine felt her face flush with embarrassment over her initial jealousy. "Oh, Tommy's doing so well in physics now. I saw his latest test scores." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Yes, and it's not just the grades. He's excited about learning again. That's why I brought these." She gestured to a container on James's desk. "My famous dumplings, though I suspect they're not nearly payment enough for giving my son his confidence back." "They're payment enough," James said softly, and Katherine noticed how his ears reddened slightly at the praise. "Tommy did all the hard work himself." After Sarah left, an awkward silence fell between them. Katherine moved to examine one of the student projects on the wall, buying time to gather her thoughts. "You disappeared," she finally said, not turning around. "After the board meeting, you just left." She heard James sigh. "I didn't want to complicate things for you. Your father was already furious, and being seen with the teacher who corrupted his daughter's thinking wouldn't have helped." Katherine turned to face him. "I'm not a child who needs protecting, James. I made my choice knowing the consequences." "Did you?" He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Did you really understand what it would mean to go against your family? To risk everything you've built?" "I understood that some things matter more than family legacy or social status," she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "You taught me that." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of internal struggle. "Katherine, you've lived in a world of privilege your entire life. My world, the real world of public education, budget constraints, and daily struggles, it's very different. So teach me," she challenged, taking a step toward him. "You're good at that, remember?" Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. James broke away first, moving to straighten some papers on his desk. "It's not that simple," he said. "Your father is trying to force me to resign from the board." Katherine interrupted. "He's already stripped me of my positions at Blackwood Publishing. Apparently I'm an embarrassment to the family name." James looked up sharply. "What will you do?" "I was hoping—" Katherine hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "I was hoping you might help me figure that out. There's an opening for a development director at Richmond Heights, someone to secure grants, manage donations, advocate for programs like yours. I may not know much about real education yet, but I do know how to raise money and navigate board politics." "You want to work here?" James stared at her in disbelief. "Katherine, you could have any job in the city. Why would you choose to—" "Because for the first time in my life I want to do something that matters." The words burst out of her. "When I saw those students sharing their stories, when I watched you teaching Tommy, when I realized what real education could be, I felt alive, really alive, not just going through the motions of success." She stepped closer to him again, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "And yes, maybe I am naive about the real world. Maybe I don't understand everything about struggling or working your way up. But I want to learn. I want to be part of something meaningful." James stayed perfectly still, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. "Katherine," he said softly, "you don't have to prove anything." "This isn't about proving anything," she replied. "It's about finally figuring out who I am when I'm not being a Blackwood." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then the classroom door burst open and Maria rushed in, clutching a paper. "Mr. Carter, I got accepted to the National Science Competition Finals." She stopped short, seeing Katherine. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," James said quickly, stepping back from Katherine. "That's amazing news, Maria. Tell us all about it." As Maria excitedly explained her project, Katherine watched James's face, saw how it lit up with genuine pride and excitement for his student's success. This was who he was, she realized. Not just a teacher, but a mentor, a guide, someone who lived to help others discover their potential. And she was falling in love with him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She excused herself quickly, needing air, space to think. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She'd walked away from her family's expectations, from her carefully planned life, and now she was falling for a man who represented everything she'd been taught to dismiss as beneath her. Her phone buzzed, another message from her father's assistant about the resignation letter. But before she could read it, another text came through. "Are you free for coffee tomorrow morning? We should talk. James." Katherine stared at the message, her finger hovering over the reply button. Behind her, she could hear Maria's excited voice still sharing her news and James's warm encouragement. She thought about her father's anger, her mother's disappointment, the comfortable life she was walking away from. Then she thought about the way James's eyes lit up when his student succeeded, the passion in his voice when he talked about real education, the way he made her want to be better, do better, matter more. She typed her reply, "Yes, I'd like that." As she walked to her car, Katherine realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't following a carefully plotted course. She was walking into uncertainty, led only by the belief that something real and meaningful was worth any price. But as she started her car, she didn't notice the familiar black sedan pulling into the school parking lot, or her father's grim expression as he watched her drive away. The next day would bring challenges she couldn't imagine, and test everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and what really matters in life. The next morning dawned grey and threatening rain, matching Katherine's unsettled mood as she walked into the small coffee shop near Richmond Heights Academy. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a simple sweater and slacks rather than her usual designer wear, but she still felt overdressed compared to the early morning crowd of teachers and commuters. James was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. His expression was serious, almost troubled, and Katherine's heart sank. Before she could reach him, however, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Maria. "Ms. Blackwood, please come to the school right away. Something's wrong." James looked up as she approached, I got the same message, he said, standing. We should go. The short walk to school was tense with unspoken words. When they arrived, they found Maria, Tommy, and several other students waiting outside room 204, looking distressed. They're taking everything apart, Tommy said, his voice shaking. All our projects, the equipment. Katherine pushed open the classroom door and froze. Two men in maintenance uniforms were dismantling the student projects from the walls. A third was packing up laboratory equipment into boxes. Stop! James strode forward. What's going on here? Orders from the board, one of the men replied, not meeting his eyes. New curriculum starts immediately. This room's being converted to a business skills lab. Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. The board held an emergency session last night. A familiar voice interrupted. Richard Blackwood stepped into the room, followed by several board members. We voted to reverse the previous decision. Mr. Whitman has been convinced that his donation would be better spent elsewhere. Katherine's father looked immaculate as always, but there was something cold in his eyes she'd never seen before. Did you really think you could challenge decades of tradition without consequences? Katherine, this school has a legacy to maintain. A legacy of what? James demanded, stepping forward. Of crushing creativity? Of valuing appearances over actual learning? Mr. Carter, Richard's voice was ice. Your contract with Richmond Heights Academy is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. The students in the doorway gasped. Maria burst into tears. You can't do this, Katherine said, her voice shaking with fury. The board already voted. The board, her father cut in, serves at the pleasure of the trustee committee, which I chair. Your little rebellion is over. Katherine, it's time to remember who you are and where you come from. Security officers appeared in the doorway. James looked at his students, then at Katherine, pain evident in his eyes. It's okay, he said softly to the crying teenagers. Remember what we learned. It's not about where you study, but how you think. Keep questioning, keep creating, keep believing in yourselves. As the guards moved toward him, Katherine suddenly stepped between them and James. If you want him to leave, you'll have to remove me too. Katherine, her father warned. Don't be dramatic. Think about what you're doing. I am thinking, she replied. For the first time in my life, I'm really thinking. She turned to address the board members. Look around this room. Look at what these students have created. Maria's water filtration system is being tested by 3 environmental organizations. Tommy's physics project won state recognition. These aren't just school assignments. They're real contributions to the world. She moved to the half-dismantled wall displays. Each of these projects represents a student who discovered their potential, who learned to think critically and solve real problems. Isn't that what education should be about? Education, her father interrupted, is about preparing students for success in the real world. No, James spoke up, his voice firm. Education is about teaching students to think, to question, to innovate. Success follows naturally when you nurture genuine understanding and passion. Katherine looked at her father, really looked at him, and suddenly saw something she'd never noticed before. Fear. Fear of change, of losing control, of a world that might value something more than wealth and status. Dad, she said softly, you've always taught me that the Blackwood name stands for excellence. But what if we've been measuring excellence by the wrong standards? What if true excellence isn't about test scores and college acceptances, but about creating meaningful change in the world? A murmur ran through the board members. Katherine pressed her advantage. Mr. Whitman, she addressed the businessman directly, you said your own success started in a science lab. Would you really deny these students the same opportunity? Gerald Whitman stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Richard assured me the new business center would better serve. Come see what we're actually doing, Tommy interrupted, his voice trembling but determined. He pulled out his phone and showed Whitman the prototype of his latest physics project, a simple but innovative device to help his autistic brother communicate. "This isn't just an assignment, sir. This is my brother's future." One by one, the students began sharing their projects, their stories, their dreams. The board members listened, really listened, and Katherine could see their expressions changing. "Perhaps," one board member finally said, "we should reconsider this hasty decision." "This is absurd," Richard Blackwood exploded. "Katherine, you're making a scene. Choose right now, your family legacy or this idealistic nonsense." Katherine felt James's presence behind her, solid and supportive. She thought about the life she'd lived before, privileged, prestigious, and utterly empty. Then she thought about the past few weeks, about discovering what really mattered, about falling in love not just with James, but with the idea of making a real difference in the world. "I choose this," she said firmly. "I choose real education over empty prestige. I choose making a difference over making headlines." She took a deep breath. "And if that means losing my inheritance, then so be it. Some things are worth more than money." The room fell silent. Then Gerald Whitman cleared his throat. "Actually, Richard, I've changed my mind. My donation stays with the science program." He turned to Katherine. "Young lady, you've shown me something I'd forgotten, that true success comes from nurturing innovation and creativity, not just business skills." Other board members began nodding, voicing their agreement. Richard Blackwood looked around the room, realizing he was losing control of the situation. "This isn't over," he snapped, storming toward the door. "Katherine, don't bother coming to Sunday dinner or any other family event until you come to your senses." Katherine felt the weight of his words, the pain of rejection, but stood her ground. As her father's footsteps faded down the hallway, James took her hand. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. She turned to face him, seeing in his eyes everything she'd been looking for her entire life. Purpose, passion, and love that had nothing to do with wealth or status. "Yes, I did," she replied, "because some things are worth fighting for." The maintenance men had stopped their work, awaiting new orders. The students were hugging each other, crying and laughing at the same time. Outside, the threatening rain had given way to sunshine. 6 months later, Katherine stood in room 204, watching as students presented their projects at Richmond Heights Academy's first Innovation Fair. The room was packed with parents, teachers, and community members. Even a few tech company representatives had shown up, interested in the practical applications of the students' work. James appeared beside her, slipping his hand into hers. They'd taken things slowly, building their relationship on a foundation of shared values and genuine understanding. She'd learned that love, like education, wasn't about surface appearances, but about what lay beneath. The passion, the dedication, the willingness to fight for what mattered. "Ready for your speech?" he asked, smiling. Katherine nodded. As the new development director of Richmond Heights Academy, she'd helped secure additional funding for the science program and expand the scholarship opportunities. Her father still wasn't speaking to her, but her mother had started sending tentative texts again, and some of her siblings had admitted they admired her courage. "You know," she said, watching Tommy demonstrate his now perfected communication device to an impressed audience, "I came here thinking I was going to change this school. Instead, it changed me." James squeezed her hand. "That's what real education does. It transforms us, shows us who we really are and what we're capable of becoming." Katherine looked around the room, at Maria explaining her expanded water filtration project, at the proud parents, at the engaged community members. This was real success, she realized. Not the kind that could be measured in dollars or status, but the kind that changed lives and opened hearts. "I love you," she said simply, turning to James. "Not because you showed me a different world, but because you helped me find the courage to choose it." He pulled her close, not caring who saw. "I love you too," he whispered, "not despite who you were, but because of who you've become." Outside room 204, Richmond Heights Academy continued its daily routine. But inside, something magical was happening. Dreams were taking flight, innovations were changing lives, and love had proved that some lessons were worth any price. As Katherine stepped up to give her speech, she caught sight of Gerald Whitman in the audience, beaming with pride at what his donation had achieved. Next to him sat Sarah Chen, Tommy's mother, wiping happy tears as she watched her son confidently answer questions about his invention. This, Katherine thought, was her real inheritance, not the Blackwood fortune, but the chance to be part of something genuinely meaningful. She might have lost her place in high society, but she'd found her place in the world. And as she began to speak about the power of real education and the importance of nurturing genuine potential, she knew she'd never regret her choice. Because sometimes the best lessons in life come from following your heart, even when it leads you far from where you thought you were supposed to be. What would you do if you had to choose between your family's legacy and following your heart? Could you walk away from everything you've known for a chance at something real and meaningful? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear about a time when you had to choose between expectations and what you knew was right. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support keeps our channel going, allowing us to bring you powerful, emotional stories every single day. Each story we share is carefully chosen to move you, inspire you, and maybe even change how you see the world. See that video on your left? Trust us, you won't want to miss it. It's another journey of transformation that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. The emotions you felt today, get ready to feel them all over again. Remember, every subscription helps us continue bringing these touching stories to life. Join our community today and never miss another heartwarming tale of love, courage, and transformation. Hit subscribe now and turn on notifications. Your next favorite story is waiting.